Good morning. It just occurred to me as I was sitting over there looking at a little statue of St. Martin, what St. Martin in the Fields is named after. And it came to mind because I've just come back from our new center in France, near Poitiers, Bonvaux. And yesterday we had a wonderful blessing for the new house. And we had some monks from Ligouget, Benedictine monks from Ligouget, about 10 kilometers away, which is the oldest monastery in Europe, monastery of St. Martin, founded by St. Martin. And St. Martin was a 5th century soldier for whom the turning point in his life came one day when he was riding a horse. Actually, he's not on a horse here. And he met a poor man. It was cold and wet, and the poor man asked him for some help. And Martin was moved to the quick, and he got off his horse and gave this poor homeless man his cloak. And that is the icon, that's the symbol of the life of St. Martin. And I think of St. Martin in the Fields, where, of course, the Samaritan movement started many years ago, and where I'm sure the church here has great compassion and outreach to the homeless and the needy that fill our urban streets today. And there is no contradiction between this act of simple human kindness, which flows naturally from the human heart when it is touched by the suffering of others. There's nothing unusual or supernatural about that. It's how we are meant to be. There is nothing more human than for our hearts to open with generosity and love to those in need. There's no contradiction, though, between that natural act of human compassion and his starting a monastery, which became one of the most contemplative monasteries in Europe. And the reason there is no contradiction is that the deep work of contemplation, the deep work of meditation that we will move into now in a few minutes, is as natural to the human person as is that natural act of compassion and generosity. My teacher, John Mayne, was once asked, what is the best way to prepare for meditation? And usually he would say, take a few moments to calm down. Our violinist here didn't have those few moments as he walked in and went straight in very brilliantly, marvelously into his performance, didn't have time to draw breath. But normally, and he actually said, could I have 5 minutes? And the pianist said no. So he rose to the occasion. And sometimes we have to do that with meditation. We have to put meditation practically into our busy lives. And we may not have the time to listen to a piece of Mozart before every meditation. But John Mayne would say, if you can, take some time to calm down, maybe physically, to de-stress, to relax, do a little yoga, do some breathing, maybe listen to some music, If you feel tired, wash your face and hands so you can refresh yourself, reminding yourself, of course, that the work of contemplation, like the work of compassion, is incarnate. It's enfleshed, embodied. We don't meditate as astral beings or as angelic beings. We meditate as human beings with a few aches and pains and maybe a bit of toothache or maybe a bit of a headache, or we meditate as human beings, embodied, as we are when we respond in love to the needs of others. So our preparation for meditation, he would say, would be some mental relaxing, laying aside the thoughts, the anxieties, the planning, all the things you've got to do, the rushing around in your head. Take some time, if you can, to begin at least to lay that aside. And your body as well. Prepare that so that you can sit still and alert during the meditation. This was how he would normally advise people to prepare for meditation. On one occasion, somebody asked this question, and he replied, "Small acts of kindness." That's the best way to prepare for meditation. And I think even that iconic moment in the life of St. Martin, which has become one of the most frequently reproduced or moments in works of art and so on, that iconic moment in itself was probably at the time a relatively small act of kindness. Probably the heavens didn't open and angels didn't start blowing their trumpets, and something had to happen after that. Maybe Martin got on his horse and went off to his next appointment. So every act of kindness, in a sense, is small if we do it from the heart. We're not dramatizing it, we're not making it glamorous, and we're certainly not hoping that it will become iconic and attract generations of praise and artistic representation. Origen, a 2nd century Christian teacher, has a wonderful little definition of prayer, and like many of those early Christian teachers, when they spoke of prayer, they didn't speak of liturgical prayer, going to church, and ritual prayer or vocal prayer. When they spoke of prayer, they spoke of pure prayer, oratio pura, the prayer of the heart, that prayer of contemplation, that probably opened itself to Martin unexpectedly, spontaneously, at that moment of pure compassion. And this understanding of prayer that Origen gives us and that we receive from the early Christian teachers is beautifully described in these few words that Origen used, which I think the modern church needs to remember. He said, "We do not pray in order to get benefits from God." Well, that puts a lot of churches out of business. A lot of the TV evangelists, and where there is this excessive and even perverse concentration on praying in order to get something that you want. A very easy way also of exploiting the poor in many poor countries. So we do not pray in order to get benefits from God, but, so why do we pray? To become like God. That's the Christian, simple understanding of prayer that is shared, of course, with the wisdom of all the great traditions. The purpose of prayer, the time that we give to prayer, the practice of prayer, is to facilitate, to encourage, to release the process of divinization, the process of our transformation, our transfiguration. That is already happening. And one of the signs that it is happening is when our heart is suddenly opened in compassion to a homeless beggar. That is a sign that every moment of our life is meaningful because it is part of this continuous process from conception to grave and beyond of our human divinization, sharing fully, as St. Peter says, in the full life of God. So we do not pray to get benefits from God, but to become like God. But then he says, praying itself is good. It is good in itself. So you don't have to justify it by its results. It may lower your blood pressure, may help you deal with stress, may help you sleep better at night, may improve your immune system, not surprisingly, because grace works on nature, physical and psychological. But those aren't if we approach meditation as pure prayer, then we're doing it for its own sake, and its own sake is to take us consciously and more deeply into this essential, continuous human process of divinization. Just to basically remind us who we are and why we're here. And then he goes on, he doesn't say however, but we could add however, there are benefits. Praying itself is good, it calms the mind, it reduces sin, and it produces good deeds. So calming the mind is a natural fruit of the kind of hour or so we spent here already this morning, the time that we will spend now in meditation. Calming the mind is a natural result of building meditation into our daily lives, so that every morning and every evening, as a minimum, we balance the day on these moments of silence, and stillness, and radical simplicity. That naturally will calm the mind. There are obvious and great benefits in having a calm mind. It reduces sin. Of course, we have to understand the meaning of sin, not simply as the breaking of a rule, but as an aberration of the mind, or as a dysfunctioning of our soul, or as a excessive activity of the ego. So it reduces sin, basically, because it reduces our self-obsession, our self-centeredness, our self-fixation, with the fears, the desires, and the suffering that accumulate around the ego when it is in that exaggerated state, inflamed state. So as the ego reduces and serves its purpose and stops bullying us and being the dictator that it can be, as the ego shrinks a little, then it reduces sin. And then the good works, for which St. Paul says we are created, the good works that we do, like St. Martin or St. Martin in the fields, those good works just flow out without people thinking about it too much, because it's a natural expression, a natural outflowing of compassion from our heart. And the best deeds are the ones we don't even know that we're doing. The more you know that you're doing a good deed, the more of yourself there is in it, and the more you're looking for something to get out of it, probably. So much better not to know that you've done a good deed until a few years later. You haven't got caught up in it. To be unself-conscious about one's goodness is, of course, a natural result of entering deeply into this fundamental work of human nature. It calms the mind, reduces sin, and produces good deeds. And that is not a bad description of how a human being should work and live and play and pray from day to day. That's the kind of life of harmony and purpose and intention and attention, the kind of well-adjusted human life that we all aspire to, what human life is meant to be as it unfolds and takes us towards our final divinization. When I visited the monastery of St. Martin in Ligugé, one of the monks was showing me around, and then we went deep down into the foundations, where the 5th century foundations of the monastery are still have been exposed. And on the surface, visible on the surface, the church you walk into is a beautiful medieval church, and you think that's old enough, but when you go down into the deep foundations, it's rather like what we do in meditation. We're going to the ground of our being. And the ground of our being is God. And in order to get to that ground of our being, we let go of all ideas of God. Because in those foundations, in St. Martin, or probably here, or in any old building, any old church, there are none of the images, none of the statues, none of the pictures, none of the crucifixes, none of the religious images that we are used to and which are useful to us at this level of consciousness. But as we go deeper, those images are no longer useful. And so the work of meditation, of pure prayer, as those early teachers called it, was to lay aside your thoughts. Just to lay them aside. You don't have to smash them, to be iconoclastic or violent, because you will use them at other times. But at the time of meditation, we enter into the radical poverty of laying them aside. And in our way of teaching meditation, which is resonant with ways of meditation in all traditions, we take a single word, a sacred word, a mantra, a prayer word, or short phrase that we repeat continuously, not to give us something to think about, but to help us to lay aside our thoughts. And that, at first, can be challenging for many people who are new to this work. Because they think of prayer, we all think of prayer as what we think about God, or receiving beautiful ideas, or useful messages. But in this depth of prayer, we enter into the silence of images and thoughts, into those deep foundations where we enter into the being of God. We're not thinking about God, we are being with God. So let's take our time for meditation now. A very short preparation is to sit upright with your back straight, put your hands on your lap or on your knees so that your body is very present to you, but very relaxed while being alert as well. Relax your shoulders, muscles of your face. Close your eyes lightly. Maybe just take a moment to be aware of your breath. This continuous cycle of breathing in the gift of life and letting it go. In meditation, we accept the gift of our being and we let it go. In those few moments, just being aware of the breath reminds us that we can take the attention off our thoughts, good thoughts as well as bad thoughts. And then, if you want to meditate in this way, you take a word that is sacred in your own tradition. We recommend the word Maranatha, Ma-ra-na-tha. And repeat the word gently, faithfully in your mind and heart, listening to the word as you say it, not trying to do anything with it, except humbly, faithfully, unself-consciously to return to it, to repeat it. This is both an act of contemplation, being in the present moment, and at the same time an act of compassion. Of compassion, first of all, to ourselves. And it opens us to that ground of being and to the compassion of God that we find there. So again, let's just take a moment to prepare quietly in stillness. Close your eyes and gently begin to repeat your word.